"Who's watching my daughter?" the Mafia boss asked. Single mom replied, "I am. She asked me to." The little girl appeared at my cafe table without the slightest warning, sliding quietly into the seat across from me, as if we had agreed to meet long ago. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with dark brown curls and eyes so strangely somber, so deep and wise beyond her years. They seemed to carry the weight of something far older than childhood. "You look kind," she said, lifting those eyes to mine with a gaze so probing it sent a shiver through me. "And safe. Are you safe?" I blinked, glancing around the small cafe tucked into the corner of a Charleston street in South Carolina. No one seemed to be looking for her. No frantic parents scanning the room, no hushed urgency in the hum of late-afternoon cappuccino conversations. "Sweetheart, are you lost? Do you need help finding your mom or dad?" I asked softly, doing my best to keep my voice calm. "I'm not lost. I'm hiding," she said, and then pulled from her backpack a thick book. On the cover was an image of a Greek god. The title read, "Greek Mythology for Young Readers," though I was certain this wasn't the kind of book a child her age typically carried around. "Can I sit here for a while?" she asked, not as a question, but with the quiet certainty of someone who already knew my answer. Every instinct in me wanted to stand, to look for an adult, to alert the barista, or even call the police. But her eyes, there was something in them that stopped me. They were filled with fear, yes, but also with resolve. They begged not to be dismissed, not to be misunderstood. It was the look of a child who had been holding herself together for far too long in a world that didn't know how to be gentle with children. I gave a silent nod and nudged my tea to the side. She opened her book, laid it on the table, and began to read as if I weren't there at all. I pretended to scroll, through my phone, but my eyes never really left her. I was trying to understand her presence, to make sense of the strange weight she carried with such quiet dignity. Around us, the cafe buzzed on, the soft clink of spoons against ceramic, the rhythmic tapping of low heels on worn wood floors, the warm scent of waffles drifting through the air. But for me, the world had narrowed to this single small table, to this unfamiliar child reading as if fleeing from something far beyond the page. A strange feeling swelled inside me, part compassion, part unease. Who was she hiding from? Why me? And if I were to stand up and leave right now, would something terrible happen to this child? A child who did not whimper, did not beg, did not ask for anything more than a place to sit quietly, with me, a stranger, and I let her stay, though I understood nothing, though I somehow knew this would change my life forever. If you found yourself pausing to listen to this story, if something in it made you stop and think, or simply stirred a quiet feeling deep within, then perhaps you're exactly where you need to be. The YouTube channel, Dear Single Mom, is a place where we tell stories that are far from perfect but deeply honest. A space where every emotion matters and every listener is truly valued. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing to the channel, clicking like, and sharing this video so more hearts can be reached by stories like these. Where are you listening from? Leave us a comment and let us know what corner of the world this story has found its way to. And now, we invite you to continue with the next part of this mysterious yet quietly heartwarming journey. I still had not asked the little girl for her name, perhaps because I feared that the moment I did, she would rise from her seat and disappear as if she had never existed. She remained silent, turning each page of her book with a care that made it seem almost sacred. I watched the expression on her face as she read, focused yet not entirely calm, as though every word on the page was a thin thread anchoring her to the present. I lifted my cup of tea and took a sip, trying to steady myself, yet unable to look away from the occasional glance she cast in my direction. After a few minutes, as if she had weighed her thoughts carefully, she repeated her earlier question, but this time her voice was clearer. "Are you safe?" I set my cup down and stared at her, startled. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked gently. She looked directly at me, unblinking. "Not everyone who looks kind is safe. Not everyone who smiles is good. But you look like someone who does not keep a gun in her purse." I let out a faint laugh, not because the comment was childish, but because there was something strangely perceptive in the way she said it. "I do not have a gun," I said, "and I am a teacher. I have a son named Eli. I come to this cafe because it is close to the school, and I think I am fairly ordinary." She nodded, as if confirming that this matched whatever she had already imagined. "What is your name?" I asked, trying not to disturb the fragile peace she had wrapped herself in. "Lena," she replied, her eyes still on the page. "How old are you, Lena?" 8. But people say I seem older than my age. I believed it. The way she spoke, sat, breathed, even the way she held the book carried the weight of someone who had lived through things many adults could not begin to imagine. "Do you want anything, sweetheart? Maybe a pastry or a glass of milk?" I asked, hoping to soften the air around us. "No, thank you. I cannot leave a trace. A trace. If I eat, there will be a receipt. If I order a drink, there will be a photo from the counter camera. But if I just sit and read, they might think I am someone's granddaughter, maybe yours." I swallowed hard, a mixture of fear and deep pity rising sharply in my chest. This child lived in a world where even ordering a simple glass of milk could be dangerous. "Who are you hiding from, Lena?" I whispered. "My father hires people to follow me. They say it is for protection. But I do not want to be protected anymore. I want to be normal." Her words pierced me like a small but relentless needle. As a single mother, I knew what it was to try so hard to keep a child safe that the effort itself became another cage. But Lena had no mother beside her. No adult shadow hovering with concern. Only this child with eyes overflowing with loneliness and fear. I was about to speak when Lena closed her book. "They will come soon," she said calmly. "I know they always find me, but just a few quiet minutes like this are enough." I looked around. No one seemed to notice us, but I could not take my eyes off this strange and fragile girl. Part of me wanted to stand and call for help. The other part, the part that was winning, wanted only to stay, to guard this fleeting moment of peace she had carved out of her turbulent world. I did not know what was happening, but I knew one thing for certain. Lena had not chosen this place by accident. She had chosen me, and that meant something. I had no chance to ask anything more because Lena suddenly froze, her small hands gripping the edge of her book while her eyes lifted as if she had caught a signal carried on a frequency I could not hear. "They are here," she whispered, her voice as light as drifting air. I turned instinctively, and then I saw them. Two men in dark suits without ties moved through the cafe crowd with a calm that felt dangerous, calling no names, showing no photo, simply sweeping their eyes from table to table with steady purpose. Their gazes never faltered, every glance carrying intent, and a cold tremor ran down my spine. Lena sat up straight, still clutching her book, her body rigid. "Is it them?" I whispered. She gave a small nod without turning her head. "If you need to leave, I can." I never finished the sentence because I surprised even myself. I took Lena's small, warm hand into mine and smiled at her as if she were a niece I had just found after school. "Sweetheart, there you are. I was so worried." Lena looked up at me, her eyes widening for an instant before she understood. "I am sorry," she murmured. "I just went to get my book from the car. I did not think it would take so long." I nodded and gently squeezed her hand. The two men were now at our table. One stopped directly beside us while the other stepped back but kept his eyes locked on us. "Excuse me," the nearer man said, his voice low and firm. "Have you seen a girl about 8 years old with curly brown hair wearing a purple coat?" "You mean my niece?" I replied and tilted my head toward Lena. "We are sitting together having afternoon tea." The man frowned, his sharp gaze flicking to Lena. "What is your name?" "Lena," I answered smoothly, and then added, "but the family calls her Lenny." I heard the lie slide from my mouth with a frightening ease. We were just having a quiet afternoon. I am not sure what the problem is. The man raised a hand to a small earpiece only he and his partner wore. A woman's voice crackled faintly on the other end, though I could not make out the words. He nodded, his eyes shifting between Lena and me. "Her father is on his way. He wants to speak to you in person." I kept my smile steady, though my heart thudded hard enough to shake the air inside me. "Of course. We will wait here." He stepped back but stayed within sight. I turned to Lena. "You are sure, sweetheart?" "Yes," she whispered. "I am sorry." "It is all right," I said, resting my hand gently against her back. "I am here." Less than 10 minutes later, the atmosphere in the cafe tightened. No one spoke, no one turned their head, yet every breath seemed to grow more cautious. A man appeared at the door. He was not overwhelmingly tall, yet something in the way he entered, in the way the crowd subtly shifted to give him space, made it impossible to ignore him. His black hair was neatly combed, his angular face, set with a firm jaw and deep dark eyes, a silver watch catching the overhead light on his wrist. He wore a black shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, revealing intricate tattoos running along his skin. His gaze swept through the cafe, and when it landed on us, I knew. This was Lena's father. No confirmation needed. no introduction required. Lena jumped to her feet. "Dad." He crossed the room quickly and knelt to gather her into his arms. His whole body seemed to unclench as he held his daughter close. He asked her something in Italian, his voice low and soft like a father soothing a frightened child. She answered in a mix of English and Italian, enough for me to understand that she was telling him I had done nothing, that I had only given her a quiet place to rest. When he lifted his head to look at me, the gentleness vanished. His eyes were cold, sharp and calculating, and I had to steady myself to keep from stepping back. He placed Lena behind him as though shielding her. From me. "Who are you?" he asked. "Rachel Moore," I said. "I am the person you have been searching for, but your daughter was the one who found me first." He narrowed his eyes. "Who is watching my daughter?" "I am," I replied, holding his gaze. "Because she asked me to." He said nothing, but I felt the weight of what had just begun. And from that moment on, I knew my life would never be the same. Dominic Vescari stared at me without blinking, as if the slightest misstep in my words would trigger a silent command to the two men standing behind him. I remained still, my voice steady, though my palms were damp with sweat. "I was already sitting here when your daughter came over," I said. "She didn't explain much. She just asked to sit in silence for a while. I didn't know who she was. But when your men walked in, she was scared. And I thought the least I could do was let her feel normal for a moment longer." Dominic frowned, as if measuring every syllable I spoke. Lena stood behind him, clutching the hem of his black shirt, her eyes glancing toward me, worried not for herself, but for me, for the possibility that I was being pulled into the storm she was so clearly trying to escape. Dominic said nothing at first, then signaled one of the men beside him. The man stepped forward and extended his hand. "Identification," he said. Slowly, I reached into my coat, pulled out my wallet, and handed over my ID along with my school badge. He didn't speak, just snapped photos of both and stepped away. Dominic turned back to me. "You're a teacher." "Yes. Middle school. I teach history and social studies at a school 3 blocks from here. And you thought it was a wise decision to let a strange child sit with you in a public café without calling anyone." "No," I replied truthfully. "I thought it was reckless. But I also think, sometimes, people just need someone to sit beside them. No questions, no judgment, just presence, like I did." Dominic studied me for a few more seconds, then gave a subtle nod. "To the car," he told his man, then turned to me, his gaze still guarded but less icy than before. "You'll come with us." "I haven't done anything wrong," I said, standing. "I only sat with her. You also claimed she was your niece when asked." "That was a lie to protect, not to exploit or harm." His eyes softened slightly, maybe because of what Lena had told him, maybe because my presence threw him off. Or maybe he saw something in me that reminded him of someone he once trusted. "You'll come with us," he said simply, his gaze still guarded. I didn't know how he had gathered that much so fast, but I wasn't surprised. Dominic didn't answer. He simply turned and walked to the door, gesturing for me to follow. Lena was still watching me, her small face etched with worry. "She will come too," I said. "I'm not going anywhere without her." Dominic stopped, then turned to look at Lena. "Come on, Lena." His voice wasn't harsh, but it held no room for negotiation. Lena hesitated, then stepped from behind him and came to my side, her hand finding mine. We walked out together, past the curious stares of a few café patrons, none of whom realized they had just witnessed a glimpse of a world that lived far beyond the rules of ordinary life. A black SUV waited by the curb. Lena and I climbed into the back seat. Dominic sat across from us. He didn't look at me at first. His eyes were on Lena. "You know those men are there to protect you. Why did you run?" Lena lowered her head. "I'm tired of being watched all the time. I just want to be like other kids." Dominic paused, then looked at me. "Do you think that's reasonable? That a child like Lena can live a normal life?" I answered slowly. "I think no one, not even you, can stop her from wanting it. And if all she wanted was one quiet afternoon with a stranger who meant no harm, then yes, I think it was worth it." Dominic nodded, offering no argument. "We'll talk more," he said. "Somewhere of my choosing. Not in a public café." I tightened my grip on Lena's hand. At that moment, I had no idea that the small lie I'd told, claiming to be family to protect a child, would pull me into a life nothing like I had ever known. And I certainly didn't yet know that this simple lie would become the beginning of everything. Of love, of danger, of the greatest risk I would ever take. But with Lena's small hand wrapped inside mine, I knew I would not regret it. The house was unlike any place I had ever stepped into. Nestled in the southern outskirts of Charleston, hidden behind tall iron fences and a discreet security gate, the grand estate bore the aged elegance of a southern manor, but cloaked in a heavy, almost suffocating silence, the kind of silence only found in places burdened by too many secrets. The driver pulled the SUV to a stop and stepped out first. The door opened, and Dominic motioned for Lena and me to follow. No one spoke as we walked the long stretch from the gate to the main hall, only the sound of footsteps echoing against marble floors, and the faint clink of wind chimes drifting from a hallway behind us. Lena still held my hand, her fingers cold as ice. Dominic led us into a wide sitting room, where golden light from a chandelier poured over dark wood and velvet furnishings, casting the whole space in the hushed glow of a film I wasn't sure I had permission to be in. He gestured to a middle-aged woman who appeared silently with glasses of water, then took a seat across from me, motioning for me to sit. I did, keeping Lena close. Dominic folded his arms and studied me for a long moment, as though trying to read thoughts hidden behind my eyes. "Rachel Moore," he said finally, his voice flat. "Middle school teacher. Son named Eli. You live in North Charleston. No criminal record. You live quietly. You ran a check on me," I stated. He ignored the comment. "I don't have much time," he said, "and I assume you don't want trouble." I agree. From his jacket pocket, he pulled a set of papers, neatly bound in a leather folder, and placed them on the table between us. "This is a non-disclosure agreement. If you sign it, you're not allowed to speak about what you've seen, heard, or learned. Not to colleagues, not to students, certainly not to the police, in any form." I looked down at the papers, a tightening sensation rising in my chest. "And if I don't sign?" "You'll be monitored. Not threatened, but watched. Every call, every message, every movement. You're no longer just an accidental witness. You've made contact with my daughter. You've heard things you weren't meant to hear. From now on, whether you like it or not, you are within my sphere of influence, and you will live as such." He didn't say it like a threat. He said it like a fact, bare and unquestionable. Lena watched her father in silence, then turned her gaze to me, her eyes pleading with words she didn't speak. I understood what she meant. "Don't leave. Don't leave me behind." I leaned forward, my voice quiet but firm. "I'll sign, but I have conditions." Dominic raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "I don't want money. I'm not asking for favors or protection. I just want to keep seeing Lena, at least regularly. And I don't want to be followed like a criminal every time." He paused for a moment, then nodded. "Fine. But it will be on my terms, at a location I choose. And each time, someone will be there." I took the pen and signed the first page. It felt less like signing a contract, and more like surrendering to something far bigger than I could name. Maybe it was a concession. Maybe it was a door. When I handed the pen back, Dominic pulled the folder toward him. "I don't trust strangers," he said, "but this child trusts you. That's not something I can ignore." He turned to Lena, his tone softening. "From now on, you'll see her again. But no more running off. No more leaving the house without permission. Understood?" Lena nodded. Dominic stood. "You'll be taken home. Next time, someone from my side will reach out. You don't need to initiate contact." I stood too, glancing around the room one last time, not because I would miss it, but because I knew everything in my life had shifted the moment I entered it. Dominic opened the door but paused as I reached the threshold. "Rachel." I turned back. He looked at me with eyes no longer cold, but no less serious. "I don't know why she chose you. But if you ever betray that trust, I won't forgive it." I didn't respond. I just nodded. And then I stepped through that door, carrying with me a strange mix of fear and attachment, as if I had just entered a land without a map and somehow there was no turning back. The next morning, I arrived at school earlier than usual. Everything around me unfolded right on schedule. Just as it did every day, the soft shuffle of students filing into class, the familiar scent of coffee, drifting from the teacher's lounge, a few scattered bursts of laughter echoing down the halls. But for me, nothing was the same. My heart still carried the weight of the night before, the silent, immense shift that happened in that house where I signed a document that tied me to the world of Dominic Vescari, a man whose name alone could silence a city. I still didn't understand why Lena chose me. Out of everyone she could have turned to, people who seemed far more trustworthy, more capable, why me? But there was one thing I knew with unwavering clarity. I could not walk away. I had become a part of something I hadn't asked for, something I hadn't even seen coming, and now I had to live with it. My first class was with the 7th graders, a lesson on post-war American history. I tried to keep my voice steady, but my mind kept drifting back to Lena, to the impossible choice I had made, and the heavy silence of Dominic's house. The day dragged on, each passing period feeling heavier than the last as I worried about what I had just stepped into. As I was packing up to leave, my phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Just one line. "This afternoon Lena will be brought to your home at 4. No reply needed." I stared at the message, then looked up at the hallway ahead. Lena was coming to my house. Not a cafe. Not school. My home. And in that moment, I felt the axis of my life shift again, another step closer to something I still couldn't name. But I knew for certain there was no turning back. I wiped down the kitchen table one last time, adjusted the plate of cookies and the 2 small glasses of milk, then glanced at the clock. Just before 4 in the afternoon. Eli was at a friend's house until evening. I had skipped the faculty meeting to come home early and prepare for Lena's first visit, not in a cafe filled with tension and surveillance, not with Dominic's silent men guarding the door. This time, it was just an ordinary afternoon, the kind any child should have. At exactly 3:55, there was a soft knock at the door. I opened it to find the same man from before, the unnamed bodyguard with the unreadable face, standing beside Lena. He gave a curt nod, his eyes sweeping across the porch, scanning every bush, every corner. "I'll wait with the car," he said simply, then stepped back. Lena stood in front of me in a pale blue cotton dress, her hair neatly tied in 2 low ponytails, clutching a book close to her chest. I smiled. "Hello, sweetheart. Come on in." She stepped inside, her eyes roaming the small kitchen and the plain wooden table I had set for us. She said nothing, just placed her book down and slid into the chair. I poured the milk and pushed the plate of cookies toward her. She studied them for a few seconds, then picked one up, held it to her nose. "Did you make these?" I nodded. "My grandmother's recipe. She used to bake them for my mom when she was little." Lena took a bite, slowly chewing. "They're not like the ones at my house, but they're softer, more real." I sat down across from her, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "Lena, you don't have to keep your guard up here. Pretend this is your house. No one's listening in, no one's watching." "There's always someone listening," she murmured, "but I know who they are. And sometimes, they let it go." I didn't know exactly what she meant, but I didn't press. Instead, I told her about when I was her age, sneaking books under the table to read during math, getting scolded by my mother for eating cookies before dinner. She began to relax. She told me she was reading about Prometheus in her mythology book, that she didn't like Zeus because he was arrogant and always hiding the truth. "I think the world would be better if people didn't hide things from each other," she said. I gave her a sad smile. I used to think that too, but then I grew up. "So when people grow up, they forget what's right?" "Not forget," I said. "Sometimes what's right just isn't simple anymore." Lena nodded, as if she'd known that long before I had. After finishing her cookie, she asked me how to make peppermint tea. I pulled a chair over so she could stand taller at the counter. We boiled water, chose dried leaves from a small jar, and waited. When it was ready, I poured it into 2 little mugs and handed one to her. "Is this how normal people drink tea? Maybe. Or maybe no one drinks it like I do. Every home has its own way." "I like this home," she whispered. "No heavy footsteps, no slamming doors, no ticking clocks that remind you someone's measuring your time." I swallowed hard. An 8-year-old child should not know the feeling of her time being measured, should not be familiar with the weight of power pressing down. Lena wandered into the living room, fingers trailing across the frames on my wall, pictures of Eli and me laughing in the park. My graduation day. How old is Eli? 11. He loves soccer, hates boiled vegetables, and never remembers to bring a jacket when it's cold out. She smiled faintly. "That sounds like someone I knew." "His name was Mateo." "Who's Mateo?" She was quiet for a moment. "Someone who used to be there. And then he wasn't." I didn't ask more. Lena sat on the sofa, running her fingers along the edge of a pillow. "If I could come here every week, even just once, do you think I could feel normal?" I sat down beside her. "You don't have to be like anyone else to be normal. But if being here makes you feel safe, then this can be your place. A place where you just get to be you." She rested her head against my shoulder, silent. A long while later, the soft knock came again. It was time. Lena stood, straightened her dress, and wrapped her arms around me. She didn't say a word. But that hug was the clearest thank you I'd ever received. From that day on, I was no longer just a stranger in Lena's life. I had become a part of the fragile world she was trying so hard to hold on to, a quiet corner untouched by control, and I knew whatever this was, it wasn't going to stop here. Lena began coming to my home every Wednesday afternoon, always at exactly 4 o'clock, always brought and later picked up by the same silent bodyguard whose name I still did not know, never early, never late. And no one ever explained why Wednesday had been chosen. But gradually, those afternoons became a quiet rhythm in my life and in Lena's world as well. She didn't change all at once the way people imagine children do when they're pulled from harsh environments. Lena changed in silence. Not through sudden hugs or sweet declarations, but in the little ways that only someone paying close attention would notice. A pair of small socks forgotten under the edge of the sofa. A firm insistence on picking the dinner playlist. A soft, breathy giggle when Eli tripped, during a pillow fight. At first, Eli asked me bluntly, as any 11-year-old might, "Mom, why does she come here so much? Is she like your adopted kid now?" I gave him a simple answer. She needs a place to breathe, and I think our home is quiet enough for that. He thought for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, I won't be loud then, but if she ever wants to play soccer, I'm ready." From that moment on, a strange kind of connection formed between the two children, one not built on similarities or shared experiences, but on the unspoken comfort of being in each other's presence. Lena didn't like noise, but she liked watching Eli move. She liked hearing about his school day, liked it when he deliberately misread words in front of his teacher to make her sigh and mock frustration. I began to see Lena draw. At first only simple pencil lines, then watercolors started to appear. One painting I'll never forget was of our living room, Lena sitting with a book, Eli dozing on the carpet, and me behind the curtain in the kitchen, just a blur of motion and light. She painted it all from memory, with a soft glow that seemed to hold the room in the palm of her hand. I taped it to the fridge. Lena said nothing when she saw it there, but the next time she came, she brought a brand new box of paints. I never asked about Dominic, and Dominic never called. The arrangements always came through the bodyguard, short and precise. Lena will arrive at 4, pick up at 6:30, sometimes 6:40, never with added explanation. I didn't know what Dominic thought about his daughter spending hours in the home of a single woman who lived off a modest teacher's salary and carried no particular status. Maybe he had someone watching my every move. Or maybe he was letting me exist as an exception, and in the silence he left between us, I slowly became something Lena had never had before. Not a mother, not a guardian, just a presence, someone who showed up, week after week, without asking anything of her. Someone who didn't pry too deep or tread into the corners of her memory she hadn't opened yet. My role in Lena's life grew as quietly as she had stepped into mine. No warning, no commotion, but it changed everything. The house grew warmer on Wednesday afternoons. Eli said her name more often at dinner. And inside me, something took root, something I hadn't realized had been waiting to grow, like a seed finding soft ground after too many years of drought. I had never imagined I could feel so connected to a child who wasn't mine. But Lena didn't need me to imagine anything. She just needed me to be there. And somehow, that was enough to make me someone I had never been before. It was a Saturday morning, late in autumn, when I received the call just before 6. An unknown number, no name, no greeting, only a voice I recognized instantly, deep, firm, unmistakable. "Dominic, be ready in 15 minutes. Lena wants you to come." Before I could ask where, the line went dead. I looked out the window. The sky hadn't yet decided whether to rise or linger in darkness. Fog clung to rooftops and the empty road beyond, and the cold wind slipped through the cracks in the frame. But I dressed anyway, pulled on a light coat, and waited. As before, the black SUV arrived without a sound. The same bodyguard greeted me with a brief nod, eyes scanning the yard, the porch, the world, as if anything could be a threat. He opened the door. Lena was already inside, seated in the middle row. She wore a thick, cream-colored sweater and the soft blue knit cap I had once seen her working on in my living room. Her eyes lit up when she saw me step in, but she said nothing. Dominic sat in the back, his eyes flicking over me the way someone glances at a document they've already read in full. The car pulled away. I didn't ask questions. I simply sat beside Lena, and she reached over, brushing her hand lightly against mine in a quiet hello. We drove out of Charleston, passing the sleepy old streets, then across the Ravenel Bridge beneath the muted light of a morning still half asleep. When the car turned onto a cobblestone drive leading up to the city's history museum, I tilted my head slightly toward Dominic. "The museum opens at 8, I said softly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured toward a man waiting by the front gate, keys in hand. "They're opening early today. Lena wanted to come when it was empty." I nodded and asked no more. The gates groaned open. Inside, the museum lights blinked on section by section, casting pools of light on the cold marble floors. There were no children running, no audio guides murmuring overhead, no distant footsteps echoing through the galleries. Just 3 adults and 1 child walking slowly through halls filled with relics. Lena walked between Dominic and me, her wide eyes, absorbing everything. She paused in front of a painting of the Irish migration to America, then stood motionless before a hand-stitched wedding dress from the 19th century. Yellowed with age but still intricate with delicate threadwork. "They had nothing," she whispered. "But they still chose to carry things like this." Dominic stood behind her in silence. He gave no instructions. He didn't rush her. For the first time, I saw him not as a man who controlled everything in his reach, but simply as a father, watching his daughter step into a world he could not explain or contain. We moved on to the Civil War exhibit. Lena stopped in front of a miniature model of a soldier's tent, pressing her hand gently to the glass. "People tell stories here," she said. "But none of them are like mine." I crouched down beside her. "Then maybe today, you tell yours, and I'll be the one who listens." Lena smiled, so faint it barely registered, "Unless you were standing as close as I was." And then she began to speak. Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't break. She didn't dramatize or dwell. She simply told. About the moment she first understood her father was important in a way newspapers never reported. About the people who hovered near her without ever giving their names. About a man named Matteo, once her bodyguard, who used to tell her fairy tales, and was suddenly gone after a phone call no one explained. Dominic didn't interrupt. He didn't correct her. He let her unravel what she carried, layer by layer. And though he remained behind her, I knew he was hearing things he'd never asked her to say. I don't know what made Lena choose this morning, or why, of all mornings, she wanted this one this quiet hour before sunrise to tell her story. But I understood why she wanted me there, not to protect her, but to remember. By the time we stepped outside, the sun had risen. Pale light filtered through the thinning trees, casting a soft glow on Lena's tousled curls. In the car ride back, she leaned her head on my shoulder and closed her eyes. Through the rearview mirror, Dominic watched. But his gaze no longer held the wary sharpness of a man laying down rules. It was something else, something closer to recognition. He was witnessing a moment he couldn't command into existence. A moment of quiet, of normalcy, of peace. A woman who didn't bear the Viscari name, who didn't carry a gun, who didn't ask for anything, but who had become, without fanfare, the most precious thing his daughter had. And Dominic understood it, even if he never said a word. That evening, after the museum, I assumed Dominic would take Lena straight back to the estate, as he always did. But instead, the black SUV pulled to a stop in front of my house. The streets were quiet, slick with rain from earlier in the day, golden streetlights casting long, wavering reflections across the pavement. Dominic stepped out first. He moved around the vehicle, opened the door for Lena, then, unexpectedly, turned to me. His voice, when it came, was quieter than usual. "I want to talk, alone." I nodded, unsure whether it was a request or a command. Lena went inside with Eli. The two of them disappeared into the living room like they'd done it 100 times before. I closed the door behind them and led Dominic out to the front porch. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The branches rustled above us in the wind, and from inside, the muffled sound of a cartoon filtered through the glass. Dominic leaned against the railing, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the empty yard. The usual sharpness in him was gone, softened into something quieter, almost lost. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady. "I used to believe everything I did was to protect her. The house, the guards, the transfer plans, the remote surveillance, cutting off anything that looked like a threat. But today, for the first time, I saw her sleep without her brow furrowed. She leaned on your shoulder, and she breathed peacefully. I didn't know what to say. I could only listen. And maybe that's what he needed. I don't know how to be a father," he went on. "Her mother died before Lena could even form full sentences. Since then, it's all been decisions. Strategic ones, hard ones, protect, control, prevent. but I've never once stopped to ask what she actually wants. Or needs. He turned to me. His eyes didn't hold that distant calculation I was used to. They held something rawer, more human. You don't ask much. You don't press. But somehow, she talks to you. She laughs. I lowered my gaze for a moment. Maybe because I don't represent anything in your world. I'm not power. I don't ask for loyalty. I'm just part of the ordinary. The kind Lena once told me she wished she had. Dominic gave a slight nod. I used to hate ordinary things. They break too easily. They're unpredictable. And most of the time, they make people weak. But now, I'm beginning to understand why she needs them so much. I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw something fracture behind his composed exterior. Not the helplessness of a man who's lost control, but the quiet reckoning of a father realizing that all the power in the world couldn't fill the distance between him and his daughter. You love her the way you know how, I said gently. But Lena's growing into herself. And the scariest truth is, sometimes love isn't enough. Dominic paused, then nodded. It was a small nod, but it carried weight. I never wanted Lena to feel like a prisoner in her own home. I just don't know how to make it feel like anything else. I rested my hand lightly on the porch railing. Maybe start with letting her choose. Something small. A book, a meal. Who gets to take her? To a museum. Not everything has to be part of your design. He was quiet for a while. Then he glanced through the window, into the house. Lena was laughing. Eli had fallen off the couch and scattered popcorn all over the floor. For a moment, Dominic Vescari wasn't a name that carried silence and fear. He was just a father standing outside the life he'd built, finally realizing he'd never truly stepped inside. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked suddenly. I looked at him, steady. "I'm afraid of the part of you that believes power can replace tenderness. But I'm not afraid of the man standing in front of me now." His lips pressed into a line. He nodded again. Then, without another word, he stepped inside to call for Lena. She ran to me and wrapped her arms around me tightly. Dominic didn't interrupt. He didn't rush her. He simply waited. And in that moment, I knew something had shifted. Not the world, but perhaps the heart of a father who, for the first time, realized that the cold walls he had built could never protect the one thing he most wanted to keep. A week after the night Dominic and I stood together on my porch, I received an invitation to the Vescari estate. This time, it wasn't a curt message from the bodyguard, nor one of those cold, efficient notifications about Lena's weekly visit. This time, it was Dominic himself who called. His voice, usually even and unreadable like a command sealed in stone, held something unfamiliar hesitation. "Lena wants you to come for dinner," he said. "And I would like to talk more." I agreed, not out of curiosity, but because I could sense something shifting in him, something subtle and internal, like the first movement of a tectonic plate after years of silence. That evening, the Vescari estate felt different than the first time I had entered it. The lighting was softer. The shadows no longer felt like eyes. When Lena opened the door, she threw her arms around me as if she'd been waiting all day. She tugged me excitedly into the kitchen, which had been arranged simply but with unmistakable warmth. Dominic was already there, not in a suit, but in a rolled-up shirt and dark trousers. He greeted me with a nod, not as a man making decisions, but as a host welcoming someone into his home. Dinner was modest. Lena chatted about school, asked if Eli still collected stamps, and laughed when I told the story of how he once faked a cough all morning to avoid a history quiz. Dominic didn't say much, but he watched Lena with the quiet focus of someone trying to memorize every detail, afraid to miss a moment. After Lena went upstairs for bed, Dominic asked me to join him in the backyard. The air was crisp. The dry rustle of leaves carried the sound of distant crickets through the night. He poured me a glass of wine and took a cup of tea for himself. "I want to ask you something," he began, his gaze lost somewhere in the dark, as if facing a memory he wasn't sure he should open. "Do you think there are kinds of darkness a person can never escape, no matter how hard they try?" I didn't answer right away. It wasn't the kind of question you asked someone unless a part of you was already unraveling. It was the question of a man standing between two worlds, one made of control, of power, of strategies built like walls, and another where his child needed something softer. Forgiveness, presence, the freedom to live without fear. I set my glass gently on the stone table between us. "I think the darkness inside each of us is different. Some people live their whole lives in it without ever realizing. Others see it and are too afraid to step out because the light might show them things they don't want to see. Dominic nodded slowly, like someone arriving at a thought they'd carried for a lifetime. I've done things, he said. Things that, if I told you, you'd never want. Lena near me again. I'm not telling you to be understood. I just don't know if it's even possible to give her a future that isn't tied to what I've done. You can, I said, but not alone. And not by building higher walls, only by letting some of them fall. He looked at me then. You're not afraid of me? I gave a faint smile. I was, but not now. Because what you're hiding isn't just power or secrets, it's regret. And the fact that you see your own darkness, that's the beginning. Dominic didn't answer. He sat there, fingers tight around the handle of his mug, staring into the dark as if waiting for some part of himself to return from far away. I'm afraid Lena will grow up and understand everything. Understand who I am. That the people who disappeared because of me. That the ones who loved her were pushed out by me. I gently tugged at the edge of the tablecloth. She will understand. But what matters is what you'll have done by the time she does. Enough, hopefully, for her to still feel proud to call you father. He didn't speak after that. But when I stood to leave, he walked me to the front door. For a brief second, he rested a hand on my shoulder, not with control, not as a gesture of power, but like someone clinging, just slightly, to the last decent part of themselves, hoping it might not slip away. I stepped through the gate, but I knew I had left something behind, not a warning, not a judgment, just a question, or maybe a flicker of longing, his longing to be forgiven, to begin again. Even if only in the eyes of his daughter. A week after that quiet night on the porch, Dominic began to appear more often. Not in the abrupt, imposing way I had first known him, no black suits, no silent men in tow, but in moments so carefully orchestrated they felt like coincidence. One Wednesday afternoon, as I opened the door expecting Lena, it was Dominic who stood there, not the usual bodyguard, just Dominic. He wore a soft gray coat, his hair still damp as if he'd just stepped out of the shower, and there was something strangely tentative in his expression, an unfamiliar flicker of uncertainty. She begged me to bring her, he said, voice gentler than usual. I was on my way to the office. Lena stood beside him, holding a book tightly to her chest, her eyes bright, as if trying not to show how much the moment meant to her. I invited him in. He hesitated, then nodded. It was the first time Dominic Vescari sat on the couch in my living room, surrounded by Eli's toys, the scent of baked cookies still lingering in the air, and a crumpled sweater I hadn't had time to fold. He didn't comment on the clutter. He simply sat there quietly, his eyes occasionally drifting to the family photos on the wall, as if stepping into a world he'd always known existed but had never touched. I made him a cup of peppermint tea, Lena's favorite. He took it in both hands, didn't drink right away, just breathed in the steam and let out a slow, careful breath. You're really not afraid of me? He asked again, but this time there was no challenge in it, just quiet curiosity. I think I've gotten used to having you around, I replied. And I've learned I can't fit you neatly into a box, labeled good or bad. He gave a faint smile, not quite amused, not quite sad. I don't know what kind of man I am anymore. Some days I think I'm someone worth hating, but then I see Lena asleep, and I realize I can't let go. I just can't. I looked at him for a long moment. What made Dominic trustworthy wasn't his power. It was that he sometimes let himself be unsure, vulnerable. The visits started happening more often, never long, never announced. But he stayed just a little longer each time. A question about Lena's appetite, a casual offer to take Eli to the park. One evening, he arrived with a container of Italian soup, his mother's recipe, he said. I didn't push him away, but I didn't rush to invite him in either. There was a clear line between us, drawn not just by circumstance, but by caution. Dominic knew I had reasons to keep a distance, and I knew he had a past I would never fully understand. Still, there were moments I couldn't ignore. One rainy afternoon, Lena sat drawing at the kitchen table while Dominic helped Eli assemble a toy train set. I caught him looking at me when he thought no one was watching. It wasn't the watchful gaze of a man measuring threat, nor the wary curiosity I'd seen before. It was something softer. A quiet search for reassurance, as if he needed to know he wasn't standing alone in the dark anymore. I looked back. I didn't look away. And in that brief instant, amid the sound of rain tapping against the windows, the gentle hum of the stove, and the golden kitchen light I felt something shift. Not love, not in the way novels define it, but a thread, a tether, a beginning of something unnamed between two people who had every reason to stay on opposite sides of the world. I don't know if a man like Dominic is capable of loving in the way we think of love. I don't even know if I could love a man like him. But I do know that everything changed the moment Lena walked into that cafe and asked me if I was safe. And maybe the change didn't stop with her. Maybe it's creeping into the quietest corners of my heart, the parts I thought I had locked away years ago. Dominic is still a question I don't have an answer to. But for the first time, I want to go looking. Not out of curiosity, but out of compassion. And because that look, the one he gave me when he thought no one saw, reminded me that even the darkness can long for light. That Friday afternoon, Lena had her first piano lesson at a small arts center tucked away in the historic quarter of Charleston. Dominic didn't accompany us. It was just me. He had said that Lena needed to feel like this was something normal, something any child would do, not shadowed by bodyguards, not weighed down by surveillance, just a quiet afternoon, with music and a piano. The center was on the second floor of an old bookstore, where the scent of aged paper mingled with the fading gloss of painted wood, wrapping the place in warmth. Her teacher, a slender, kind-faced woman named Sylvia, greeted us with a gentle smile. Lena was nervous at first, her shoulders stiff, her fingers tucked tightly into the sleeves of her sweater. But when Sylvia sat her at the piano, showed her a few basic keys, and asked softly, "Do you know any notes yet?" Lena nodded and placed her hands on the keys. I sat in the back of the room, quiet, not wanting to intrude. For about 20 minutes, all was calm. The soft clink of piano keys, Sylvia's encouraging words, the small furrow in Lena's brow as she concentrated. And, then without warning, the door burst open. A man I had never seen before stormed into the room, his breathing ragged, his eyes bloodshot. I jumped to my feet. Sylvia stepped forward instinctively to block him, but he pointed past her, straight at Lena. "That girl," he said, voice hoarse with fury. "She's one of the Vescari, isn't she?" There was no mistaking the venom in his words. I moved quickly, instinctively, stepping between him and Lena, my hand raised like a shield. Lena remained at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, her entire body frozen. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking but steady. "You need to leave. Now." Sylvia was already on the phone, calling security downstairs, but the man didn't budge. "I lost everything because of her father," he spat. "My brother disappeared. My whole family fell apart. And now you let her live like nothing ever happened?" Dominic wasn't there. But his shadow, his choices, his past, they were thick in the air. Lena didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, motionless, her silence louder than any scream. I turned to her, ready to say something, anything, but that's when the heavy footfalls arrived. 2 security guards and Dominic's usual bodyguard rushed in. Within moments, the man was restrained and dragged out, still shouting words no child should ever have to hear. I pulled Lena into my arms as the door slammed shut. Her skin was ice cold. She didn't speak. Sylvia stood near the piano, her face pale, stunned. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I didn't know to whom I was apologizing. "Lena, Sylvia, the world," I called Dominic. He said nothing through the entire phone call, only, "I'll be there in 12 minutes. And exactly 12 minutes later, he was. He walked into the room calmly, without panic, without fury. He looked at Lena, then at me. "Is she hurt?" I shook my head. "No. But she's shaken." Dominic walked over and knelt before his daughter. "Are you all right?" Lena didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on something beyond the room, far past the walls. Then, after a long moment, she whispered, "I'm okay." And then she looked up at him. Her voice was quiet, but it split the room like a blade. "But I'm tired of always being okay." Dominic froze. All the steel in him, all the control, all the armor fractured in that instant, not because of force, but because his child had named the pain he could not protect her from. He wrapped his arms around her. No words, no orders, just a long, human embrace. I stepped back, throat tight, heart heavy. Something broke open inside me, not just for Lena but for Dominic too, because I realized that this moment marked something irreversible. The distance between them, between me and him, between the worlds we had each come from, they were all trembling now, cracking, shifting. After the incident, Dominic canceled Lena's lessons at the center. He hired a private instructor to teach at the estate. I understood. But Lena didn't. One evening, not long after, she asked me a question in the kitchen softly, with no one else around. Why is something normal for everyone else dangerous for me? I took her hand. Because you come from a different world. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve the same things. It just means that, sometimes, you'll have to fight harder for them. She didn't cry. But her eyes, those eyes hit me like a wave. They weren't the eyes of an 8-year-old. They were older, tired, shaped by too many moments a child should never have to carry. I don't know how to return to Lena the childhood she never really had. I don't know how to erase the silence left behind by the piano's last note, cut off by a scream from the past. But I do know this. None of us walked out of that room the same. And I know where the lines are between right and wrong, between near and far, between holding on and letting go. All I know is that I've gone too far into this story to walk away. And I won't. Not out of fear. But because love, real, aching, fierce love has taken root. And now, there is no turning back. 3 days after the incident at the music lesson, Dominic came to my house just as the sky was settling into dusk. There was no black SUV waiting at the curb, no bodyguards lingering in the shadows. Just a tall man standing on my front steps, hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, gazing quietly at the warm light spilling from the living room window, where Eli and Lena sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring side by side. I opened the door. I didn't ask why he had come. He looked at me for a moment, then spoke, his voice low and steady. I don't want what happened the other day to happen again, and I don't think I can let her out of my sight anymore. But I also know she needs you. She needs Eli. She needs a part of the world I've never been able to give her. He handed me a key. I took it, not fully understanding yet what it meant. Only that this time, unlike every time before, Dominic wasn't giving an order. He wasn't drawing lines or laying out terms. In his eyes, I saw something I'd never seen from him until now. A request for trust. That night, I sat beside Eli and asked how he'd feel about staying at Lena's house for a while. He shrugged, asked if we could bring the cat, and if he'd still get to play soccer after school. I said yes, and he nodded, as if I'd just proposed an extended field trip. Moving into the estate didn't feel like a grand upheaval. We didn't pack our lives into boxes, just a few suitcases of clothes, Eli's favorite toys, school books, family photos, and the chipped teacup I always used in the mornings. Dominic arranged for a separate space for Eli and me on the east wing of the house, not far from Lena's room. There were no locked doors, no surveillance cameras in the corners, none of the coldness I'd expected. Everything had been prepared with quiet care. Nothing too grand, nothing unfamiliar. But the thing that struck me most was Lena. She seemed relieved in a way I hadn't seen before, like something inside her had unclenched. She lit up the first morning she saw me and Eli padding into the kitchen in pajamas, laughing over cereal and telling half-sleep stories. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her face said enough. Dominic didn't interfere. He let us find our rhythm. He kept his distance at first, only joining us for the occasional dinner. Always quiet, always watching. I remember one night, after a quiet meal, I asked him if it felt strange, having near strangers move into his home. He glanced at me and offered a half-smile. Strange, yes. But I've never seen anything feel more right. You're not a stranger to Lena anymore. And I don't think you're a stranger to me either. I didn't know how to answer him, just that something in me softened at those words. Something small and cautious and quietly hopeful. I began to grow used to seeing Dominic in the small, mundane spaces of life. Walking through the hallway in a t-shirt with a mug of coffee in hand. Sitting at the breakfast table with a paper, brows furrowed in thought. Standing in the garden, watching Lena and Eli toss a ball in the grass. Gone was the man, cloaked in tension and surveillance. What remained was someone quieter, a little more present, a little less afraid. We talked more. Not about security protocols or family legacies, but about the way Lena liked her eggs, how Eli hid his homework under the couch, about the 1,000 little things Dominic had never allowed himself to notice before. One night, after Lena had gone to bed, I was standing in the kitchen washing dishes. Dominic walked in, without a word, and started drying them with the dish towel. His hands were awkward with the cloth, but his face was unburdened, more at ease than I'd ever seen it. I turned to ask him what he thought about us staying there, but before I could, he spoke. "It feels like home," he said. I've never had that before. Not even in this house. I didn't respond. But my heart tightened. Because I knew then, without question, that I was no longer outside their story. I was inside it, not as the woman who had once been pulled in to comfort a child, but as someone who had slowly, quietly, become part of something being rebuilt, gently, tentatively, something that looked, though none of us dared call it so, like a family. We never sat down and said it out loud that from now on, we were a family. There was no formal ceremony, no promises exchanged, no papers signed. But every morning I woke to the sound of Eli calling Lena in that sleepy voice of his. Every evening I saw Dominic step out of his office to quietly ask what we were having for dinner. Every nod exchanged between people who were no longer strangers. Every burst of laughter from the backyard, as the kids argued over who got to water the tomato plants first. All of it came together to form something that could only be called one thing: family. Lena started laughing more. She still loved her quiet moments, still liked to draw alone or write in her tiny, slanted handwriting in a notebook she kept under her pillow. But now, she'd sneak up behind me while I cooked and wrap her arms around my waist. She'd lean against Dominic's shoulder during movie nights. She'd whisper, "I missed you," when Eli spent the night at a friend's house. She was learning how to belong, how to let herself be held, how to reach out, how to feel safe. Dominic changed in ways no one could have predicted. He stopped stationing guards in every hallway. He started leaving his office door open. And once, I caught him helping Eli with a paper model train set, hands covered in glue, brow furrowed in concentration after folding the tabs wrong. It was the kind of moment no one would have ever imagined. The man who once embodied control and power, now crouched on the floor beside an 11-year-old, trying to make sense of fragile paper and childhood whimsy. He didn't speak much about his feelings, but the way he showed up fully and without distraction was how he said everything that mattered. He was changing. And he wasn't fighting it. One night, I woke to the sound of wind whistling through the trees. I stepped out into the hallway and saw the soft glow of the living room lamp still on. Dominic was sitting on the sofa, a half-open book resting in his hands, though he wasn't reading. His gaze was distant, lost somewhere beyond the page. When I walked over, he looked up and said quietly, more to himself than to me, "There are nights I still think this is all temporary, that by morning you'll all be gone. Lena will pull away again, and I'll go back to the cold emptiness I once thought was safety." I didn't try to reassure him. I just sat beside him and let the silence be what it was. Then, I reached over and laid my hand gently over his. It was a small touch, not a promise, not a definition, but enough. Enough to say, "We're not going anywhere. Not tonight." And Dominic nodded, as if saying thank you without needing words. We went on living through the most ordinary of days quietly, making breakfast, driving the kids to school, taking the cat to the vet, arguing over which movie to watch on weekends, laughing when Eli spilled milk on Lena's shirt, sitting outside in the evening, just listening to the sound of the night falling around us. I never imagined my life would look like this, that I'd become a part of a world once ruled by a man who used to terrify me, that I'd live in a house I didn't build with my own hands, but somehow helped reshape day by day with patience and empathy, that a child I didn't give birth to would call me something so soft and sacred. Just miss. There are days I think, if there is such a thing as a miracle, this must be it. The way we found each other, without grand entrances, without declarations, just bit by bit like sunlight slipping quietly through a window after a long night. And the strangest thing of all is that I don't feel alone anymore. Not the single mother carrying the weight of the world by herself, but a woman with a place, a small but steady circle where I belong, a circle we never formally named, but one that feels, in every breath and glance and quiet moment, like home, like family. That night, it rained, not the kind of rain that lashes down in southern storms, but a gentle, persistent drizzle, each drop falling like cold fingers tapping softly on the rooftop. Lena and Eli were already asleep. The house was so quiet I could hear my own breath as I stepped onto the back porch, where Dominic was already standing, holding a glass of red wine, his eyes unfocused, lost somewhere in the water-streaked dark. I knew he was thinking. Dominic always thinks when it rains, maybe because rain doesn't let you hide anything for too long. He turned when he heard the door, didn't smile, didn't look surprised, just extended the wine glass slightly toward me, a silent offer without words. I shook my head, then sat on the wooden chair beside him, pulling my coat tighter against the damp chill seeping through the fabric. It was a long time before Dominic spoke. His voice was hoarse from too much silence. I've spent my entire life building what people call an empire, and in the process, I lost almost everything else. No one beside me. No one brave enough to come close. Then one day, a little girl looked up at me and asked if I was safe. I couldn't answer, because for the first time in my life, I wished someone else would answer that for me. I didn't interrupt. Dominic set his wine glass down on the wooden table, fingers laced together, his gaze finally meeting mine, steady and unflinching. You're the only person I haven't tried to control, and the only one I'm afraid of losing. The words came so softly they almost disappeared into the sound of rain, yet they landed in my chest like a stone. I hadn't even had time to respond before Dominic continued. This wasn't a confession, not really. It was something simpler and far stranger. I don't know what we are. I don't know where this could go. But if you're willing, I want you to stay. Not for Lena, not for Eli, for me. I looked at him, looked long and hard. And for the first time, I didn't see Dominic Vescari, the man with a past thick as night trailing behind him. I saw only a man standing in front of me with a heart full of cracks, not asking for forgiveness, not bargaining, just hoping someone might stay. I didn't answer, right away. Some questions don't need words. I leaned my head against his shoulder, felt his warmth through the damp layers, listened to his heartbeat, uneven but steady. Dominic said nothing more. He just wrapped his arm around my shoulders and held me, gently, as if afraid I might vanish if he held too tight. The rain kept falling, but in that moment, we heard nothing else but the presence of each other. It wasn't a romantic beginning. It was something deeper. A missing piece, quietly and perfectly placed into a space neither of us had been able to name. And I understood. I was no longer a passerby in Dominic's story. I had become the answer he never dared to believe he deserved. That year, Lena's birthday fell on an early spring day, just as the orange tree in the backyard began to sprout fresh leaves and the sunlight softened from the harshness of late winter. Dominic had never celebrated Lena's birthday before, not because he forgot, but because he always believed that things like cakes and balloons were unnecessary luxuries in a life filled with the kind of danger his daughter had been forced to grow accustomed to since she was small. But this year was different. This year, Lena had Eli. She had me. She had mornings with pancakes that didn't need to be pre-checked. She had afternoons spent cutting paper crafts in the kitchen with me. She had nights when she could fall asleep without a nightlight blazing like a guardian at her bedside. 1 week before her birthday, Dominic walked into the living room, holding a small notebook, and sat at the table where I was wrapping gifts. He placed the notebook down, opened to the first page, and said something that made me pause. "Would you help me make a guest list?" I laughed, half teasing. "Who are you inviting? Your bodyguards?" Dominic didn't laugh. He looked at me with rare seriousness. "I want Lena to have friends, regular kids, her music teacher if she wants, and, if it's not too much trouble, maybe a few people you care about." I nodded, my chest tightening not because of the party itself, but because I realized Dominic had crossed some invisible line that was bigger than any celebration. He no longer feared the presence of the outside world. He was beginning to learn how to let Lena live, not just survive. We chose a fairy tale forest theme because Lena adored mythology and wanted her classmates to come in costume. Dominic let Eli and me handle the decorations, and even had an outdoor kitchen set up so the kids could bake their own cookies. Lena wore a green dress, her hair braided on both sides with a tiny crown I had specially made by a craftswoman in Savannah. When she stepped out of her room, Dominic froze. I had never seen him like that before. He looked stunned, eyes fixed on his daughter as if seeing her for the first time, not as something to protect, but as something beautiful, pure, and worthy of shining. The yard filled with children's laughter. Lena didn't pull away, when others came near like she used to. She ran, played, showed her friends the hidden treasure Eli had mapped out, led them to the music room, proudly introduced Dominic as her father, and me as the one who taught her to make her first chocolate cake. Dominic didn't retreat indoors as he often did. He stood in the middle of it all, speaking with the other parents, even chuckling when a child tugged on his jacket asking to take a picture with the king of the castle. I saw the change in him, and my heart clenched not from simple emotion, but because I knew he had stepped out of the armor he once thought was his only safe place. When it came time to blow out the candles, Lena closed her eyes longer than usual. I stood close enough to hear her whisper her wish. "I wish no one would ever leave. Ever." The candles went out, applause broke, cake was served, and I saw Dominic stand still, behind Lena, unnoticed by the crowd. But I saw the tears brimming in his eyes. He didn't cry, but I knew if Lena had said one more word, he might not have been able to hold it in. That night, after all the guests had gone, I was cleaning the outdoor kitchen while Dominic silently folded chairs beside me. Lena had fallen asleep, curled up in Eli's lap on the sofa. I turned to Dominic and asked softly, "Are you all right?" He nodded and answered quietly. Today I finally understood why people call the small things precious. Not because they're rare, but because sometimes, to have them, you have to give up the darkest parts of yourself. I said nothing, only gently took his hand, and in the quiet darkness after a day full of laughter and light, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This was no longer just a house built to keep danger out. It had become a place where the hearts of 3 people once shattered were being stitched back together, piece by piece, with birthday cake, laughter, and one fragile wish that cut through everything. I wish no one would ever leave. Ever. That night, after the birthday party, when everything had been tidied and put away, and both Lena and Eli were fast asleep in their rooms, I stepped out onto the porch in search of some air. The chill in the air was gentle, not biting, and in the soft quiet of the night, Dominic was already there, leaning against a wooden pillar, holding a steaming cup of tea in his hand. He didn't turn when I approached, just shifted slightly, making space for me beside him. We didn't speak for a long while. The sound of insects blended with the breeze rustling through the trees above us, casting a peace so rare it felt borrowed, the kind of peace I knew he hardly ever let himself feel. Dominic set his cup down on the small table between us, then turned to me. In the dark, his eyes were deeper than usual, heavy and honest in a way I hadn't seen before. I used to think I'd never be able to say it aloud, but I owe you the truth. I nodded, not pushing. He exhaled slowly, as if the breath itself had to carry out the weight of whatever had been buried inside him. The day Lena was born, I wasn't there. Not because I was busy, but because I chose not to be. Her mother was the only person who ever saw me, not as Dominic Viscari, but as a clumsy man, quiet and angry at himself. She loved me when there was nothing lovable left. But I couldn't believe I was capable of holding on to anything that my own hands wouldn't eventually destroy. He paused, tightening his hands slightly in his lap. When she died, I didn't cry. I didn't feel I had the right to. And from that moment on, I swore I wouldn't let anyone touch what was left of me. I built everything around Lena out of steel and rules. I didn't let her love anyone, trust anyone, and I didn't let myself do it either, until you walked in. I looked at him then, and I could hear it, his voice showing the cracks forming, quiet but unmistakable. You scare me, because I can't control you. You don't need me to be anyone. You just sit there, quietly, gently, as if I am still someone worth forgiving. I didn't know how to respond, not with words, because every word he spoke struck something deep inside me. Dominic bowed his head, his fingers grazing the armrest of the wooden chair. If one day you choose to leave, I won't stop you. But I need you to know, no matter what happens, you saved me. Not by turning me into someone better, but by giving me the chance to be part of a life I never dared dream of. The wind brushed past, colder now. I leaned gently, resting my head against his shoulder. I didn't save you. You were the one who walked out of the darkness on your own. I was just someone who happened to sit still long enough for you to believe the light wouldn't burn. Dominic let out a soft laugh. Not joyful, not sad, just something deep from within, as if accepting that everything had unfolded the way it needed to. I hadn't yet promised to stay forever. But that night, on the porch, between a late confession and a hesitant touch, I knew some bonds don't need names. They just need to be lived, quietly, one day at a time, with sincerity and a fragile trust in what is kind. And that night, Dominic was no longer the man I had once feared. He was the man I chose to sit beside beneath a sky full of stars, silently, with nothing left to say. One late afternoon, under a sky heavy with low-hanging gray clouds that seemed to press down upon the roof of the house, I received a call from Lena's school principal. Her voice was low and cautious as she informed me that someone claiming to be a relative from Lena's birth mother's side had arrived at the office, demanding to see the child and requesting legal guardianship. Dominic wasn't home at the time. He was in the middle of an urgent meeting in the Northern District and couldn't return right away. I went to the school alone, carrying with me a storm of thoughts that had yet to take shape. The woman was in her early 40s, neatly dressed, articulate, and held a notarized document outlining a distant familial connection. She claimed to be Lena's maternal aunt and said she had been barred from contact for years because, in her words, the father's side hid all information. I sat across from her, unable to shake the chill that ran along my spine as she spoke with a tone far too calm for what she was saying. She didn't ask how Lena was doing, whether she was healthy or happy. Her only concerns were whether the child stood to inherit anything and whether Dominic intended to take her out of the country in the near future. When the principal glanced at me, perhaps seeking an official response, I suddenly caught sight of Lena at the far end of the hallway. She couldn't hear what was being said, but her face was tight with tension and fear. I got up and walked to her, kneeling so our eyes met, and asked gently, "Do you know who that is?" Lena shook her head. I pulled her into my arms. That embrace wasn't meant to comfort, it was a decision. I returned to the meeting room, looked the woman straight in the eye, and said, "She is not a legal guardian. Dominic is the sole legal custodian, and I am the authorized caregiver in his absence. I will not allow anyone near Lena if it makes her feel unsafe." The woman raised an eyebrow and scoffed. "Who do you think you are to make decisions for other people?" I answered quietly. "I'm not her biological mother, but I am the one she chose to trust. And because of that, I will say anything I have to in order to protect her, even if it means telling a lie." The meeting ended in tense silence. The principal didn't add anything more. The woman left, visibly seething. I held Lena's hand the entire way home. I didn't offer lengthy explanations, just told her that sometimes even adults have to make choices, and today, I chose her. That night, after Lena had fallen asleep, Dominic returned and listened as I told him everything. He sat in silence for a long time, eyes lost in the distance, then turned to me and said, "You know, if this had happened a few years ago, I would have erased every trace in a single night, but not now. Now I'm afraid. Afraid that one wrong word, one wrong person, will hurt her all over again." I placed my hand over his and gave it a gentle squeeze. "I'm afraid too, but I'll still lie if I have to. I'll keep building safe truths if it helps Lena feel loved." Dominic said nothing, but his eyes were quietly rimmed with tears, not from loss this time, but from something close to faith. And I knew then that a lie told for a child is not a sin. Sometimes, it is the only way to hold on to the most fragile thing we've fought too long and too hard to keep. We didn't begin a new chapter with any ceremony. There was no formal promise, no fairy tale wedding, no family portrait hung on the wall amid bursts of laughter. But with each passing day, each quiet morning when Lena softly called Eli awake, each evening when Dominic leaned into my shoulder and drifted off to sleep halfway through a movie, each simple meal shared over honest conversation, we were quietly writing a new chapter. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was a family. There were afternoons when Dominic and I sat together on the porch without saying much. He remained reserved, still carrying in him corners of the past he may never fully share, but he had learned to set down his guard. I was no longer the single mother carrying everything alone. Between us were the children, the understanding, the unspoken things that somehow held firm through time. One evening, Lena asked me a question, her voice barely above a whisper, as if hiding it might keep her from being laughed at. "Do you think I could ever be normal?" I pulled her into my arms and told her that normal is a strange word, because sometimes, the people who have lived through the most unusual things are the ones with the most beautiful hearts. "And you," I said, "you have lived bravely, and that alone is enough. This story isn't a fairy tale. Dominic still has much to learn before he becomes a whole and steady father. I still have moments of uncertainty, not knowing if the path I'm on is the right one. And Lena still sometimes falls into long silences, her eyes drifting to a faraway place no one else can reach. But what's different now is that we are no longer alone in those moments. We have each other. We have companionship, not built on promises of forever, but rooted in the quiet, full-hearted presence we bring to each day. And maybe that, more than anything, is what defines a family. Not perfection, but a place to return to. A place where silence is understood, where broken pieces are gathered without judgment. If you're watching this video and you feel this story has touched something inside your heart, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing the YouTube channel Dear Single Mom so you won't miss any of the deeply moving, honest, and meaningful videos we share each day. What are your thoughts on the journey of Dominic, Lena, and the woman who chose to stay? Was there something in it that spoke to your own life? We'd love to hear your reflections, your genuine stories. Please leave a comment below, because perhaps your story may one day be the light someone else needs while walking through their own darkness. Thank you, truly, for staying with us through to the end. Wishing you health, joy in the everyday, deep peace, and moments of quiet contentment in your heart. Until next time, take care and goodbye.